What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at the 11-game Week 12 main slate here. And as always, I like to start the video with my favorite play of the week. The number one player that I am including in my core plays is Amon-Ra St. Brown. So alongside Amon-Ra, I'm going to give you my core plays for the entire set of games on DraftKings and FanDuel. I'm going to give you some lineup strategies and some overall advice to build some winning lineups here in week number 12. And for me, the slate begins and ends with Amon-Ra St. Brown, guys. We have a situation where Amon-Ra St. Brown is entering the week as the number one weighted opportunity wide receiver that is playing this week. Over the last 3 weeks of play, he has earned 32% of Detroit's team targets, over 50% of team air yards, and he's actually also one of our underperforming wide receivers this week in the Occupy model. Over the last 3 weeks of play, he has underperformed expectation by over 20 PPR points, and you don't have to look any further than last week's game log against the Philadelphia Eagles, where he had just 2 receptions for 42 yards on 12 total targets. That is an incredibly disappointing performance for those of you that had him in your showdown lineups last week against the Eagles for sure. But we're looking for a bounce back here against the New York Giants, who are one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL this season. And with no Sam Laporta available, it is going to be, we think, the Amon-Ra St. Brown show primarily here for the Detroit Lions. So first player into my lineups this week is going to be the number one weighted opportunity wide receiver in the NFL here, available for week number 12. Now, beyond that, I do like to look at the running backs that are playing in favorable game script situations. And we have quite a few advantageous ones this week. I look at spreads and totals and betting markets and start with the players on rosters that are favored pretty heavily, because that is our biggest indicator of a likely positive game script for running backs, and therefore a good scenario for generating fantasy points in DFS lineups. And sticking with the Lions are favored by 13.5 points against the Giants in that matchup at Ford Field here this week. So Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, really good opportunity to generate some fantasy points here against the worst rush defense in the NFL. The Giants rank 32nd by DVOA defending running backs this season, and they are roughly league average defending running backs in the passing game. So Gibbs definitely still far out touching Montgomery in the running game. So I think he is the preferred play here, and he's going to be a very good play for low risk lineups. But in high risk lineups, we obviously want to consider David Montgomery and his ability to potentially fall in the end zone a couple times with a goal line centric role. Not as many targets in recent weeks for Montgomery, and we've seen a negative game script last week against the Eagles that he really disappeared on the stat sheet. But this is the type of game script that could benefit a player like David Montgomery if the Lions go out and they meet their 32-point implied team total here. So to recap, Montgomery good for high risk, Gibbs good for low risk here. Now, sticking with 13.5-point favorites in the Occupy model, we have the Baltimore Ravens at home against the reeling New York Jets. Jets have benched Justin Fields. They're going to be starting Tyrod Taylor this week. Derrick Henry represents a good opportunity to take advantage of a poor Jets defense. They're actually slightly above average defending running backs, but that's defending running backs not named Derrick Henry. And they're very below average defending running backs in the passing game. I think Henry's going to be more popular on FanDuel this week than he is going to be on DraftKings because of this pricing. He's $7,600 here on DraftKings. And when we look at the FanDuel low risk build, to peek ahead a little bit in the video here, the $8,400 price tag fits a little bit better with some of the other plays that we like this week on FanDuel. So Henry definitively within the top 3 most popular running back plays on FanDuel. Low risk viable on DraftKings, obviously, with the Ravens favored by 13.5 points. We have Seattle, and they're favored by 12.5 points against the Tennessee Titans this week. And this is a split backfield on the road here against Tennessee between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Walker flashing on the injury report here for the first time this season with a glute injury. He is expected to be good to go by head coach Mike Macdonald and should see the majority of the work in this backfield. You look at last week in a loss to the Rams, 16 carries, 3 targets for Walker. Charbonnet, right on his heels, 11 carries, just 2 targets. So all year long, we have seen Walker get more opportunities in the passing game than Zach Charbonnet and slightly more opportunities on the ground. But this is very much a 50-50 split as far as those rushing opportunities are concerned. And it's very, very hard to predict who is going to get the best opportunities to succeed with these guys basically rotating series for the Seahawks here. Beyond that aspect of it, though, they both have a great opportunity here with the Titans being the 26th ranked rush defense and well below average defending running backs in the passing game. Just a matter of spinning that wheel and seeing which one you land on as being correct here. I do think Kenneth Walker III is probably the better play. I'm personally considering both of these guys high risk this week because we have other running back opportunities that are a little bit more clear to take advantage of. This next one I want to talk about, unfortunately, is no longer one of them, though, and that is the New England Patriots. They're favored by 7 points here in their matchup on the road against the Cincinnati Bengals. And this is an interesting situation because this was a game that actually had a slightly lower total, about 49 points. It's now 51.5. And this game also had a little bit of a larger spread. New England, 9.5 points. It's now down to 6.5 to 7 points, depending on where you look. And that is because we're expecting Joe Burrow to return under center for Cincinnati. So this should be a little bit of a more competitive game. We're also going to see Ramondre Stevenson return to the backfield for the Patriots. And basically all year before his recent stretch of missed games, he has been operating as the primary tailback on early downs for the Patriots. It's just a matter of whether or not Mike Vrabel, Josh McDaniels, and this Patriots coaching staff will honor that early season commitment to Stevenson as the guy or shift more volume towards Travion Henderson, who has been far more explosive. You see 31 plus PPR points over the last 2 weeks alone. I think based off of merits, Henderson should clearly get more work here, even with Stevenson available, but it's just not clear here what New England is going to do. So both Henderson, who I think is the better play, and Stevenson, who is the speculative, cheaper, established play, probably both have to be high-risk plays here in week number 12 because we just don't know what the Patriots are going to do with the touches here. Keep an eye on the New England beat to see if we get any lean here over the next 36 hours or so before kick on Sunday afternoon. We have Josh Jacobs or Emmanuel Wilson with the Green Bay Packers at home against the Minnesota Vikings. And Jacobs basically gave a ton of quotes to the media here on Friday afternoon about how basically he doesn't believe in missing games. He wants to play, but they do have a quick turnaround with a game on Thanksgiving coming up next week. And it seems like there is a pretty good chance that this Packers staff, after his knee injury on the turf at MetLife Field last week, may actually hold him out on Sunday. We have to wait and see what they do here, but most of your popular tools that project ownership here are assuming that Emmanuel Wilson is going to get the start for the Packers this week. And that includes our tools here, our projections here at OccupyFantasy.com. So right now, at his cheap price tag on both sites, $5,300 here on DraftKings right now on the screen, we're expecting Emmanuel Wilson to be one of the more popular plays on this slate. This is your if-then scenario for week number 12. If Josh Jacobs is out, then Emmanuel Wilson should be in the majority of your lineups this week, and he especially should be in your low-risk lineup here with Green Bay favored by 6.5 points against the Minnesota Vikings in a really, really advantageous spread and total situation here, and obviously at a great price for Wilson here. If Jacobs is in, then it obviously throws off the balance of power a little bit on this slate, and I would actually consider Jacobs more of a high-risk play because of both the price and the injury situation. They may limit his work and go more of like a 50-50 split with Wilson if he plays. For DFS, the preferable scenario here would definitely be Jacobs on the sidelines, and we can assume Wilson gets the vast majority of the work here. We're just not going to know without a firm report on either Saturday or Sunday here to make a decision there. So Green Bay here, I think high risk, but if we get Jacobs ruled out, we can then slot in Emmanuel Wilson into low risk lineups on both sites. That's great. I talked about 5 teams with running backs and nobody that I want to put into my low risk DraftKings lineup at running back. Bit of an issue, right? The first place I want to go for low risk running back is actually Chase Brown with the Cincinnati Bengals. And over the last couple of weeks, without Samaje Perine available, he has had virtually all of the opportunities in the backfield for the Bengals here. And we see the 18 carries and the 8 targets last week against Pittsburgh in a really, really negative game script for the Bengals. Can't really get much worse than that, losing by 22 points, and he still got 26 touches. If we get Joe Burrow back under center, hopefully this game is a little bit more competitive. It's expected to be higher scoring, so a little bit more equity in terms of points available for Brown to earn in terms of like real points, touchdowns, and hopefully touches as well here. So Chase Brown, 6,200 here on DraftKings. And when you look at the projected ownership, 6,900 over on FanDuel, he is going to be your most popular running back on both sites this week. Now, sticking with DraftKings, we have Bijan Robinson right behind him. He is going to be the second most popular play. We've already talked about Gibbs and Wilson and Derrick Henry, the one running back I have not talked about in this popular tier. Ashton Jonty with the Raiders. I think he's a fine low-risk play if we don't have access to Emmanuel Wilson. So for the purpose of building a lineup in this video, I am just going to go ahead and assume that we get the news that Josh Jacobs is out to just build out the rest of this lineup here. So Emmanuel Wilson, $5,300. And then we have Genty here with the Raiders that should get a really good opportunity against the Browns, with rookie Shadur Sanders making his first full start here. Coming off of a poor performance, we still think Genty is going to be very popular here in week number 12, but this gives us a really healthy amount of salary to work with in terms of finishing off the rest of our lineup and getting access to Amon-Ra St. Brown, especially here on DraftKings. I'm going to flip over to FanDuel to show you where I think the FanDuel slate is going to be. Chase Brown, Derrick Henry. You see 6,600 remaining for this final spot. That's going to be your Emmanuel Wilson spot, effectively, for the FanDuel low-risk lineup. We have Amon-Ra St. Brown in here. On FanDuel, we like a skinny stack with Wan'Dale Robinson in low risk because his price just has not really moved. I think he was 5,800 last week. He's 5,900 this week. And when we look at weighted opportunities, he leads the Giants, here. He's got a 31% share of team targets, just a 25% share of team air yards because he's running mostly slot routes here. But Wan'Dale Robinson here going to be a great low-risk play on FanDuel especially. And then Jacoby Myers. He should see a ton of work with Brian Thomas ruled out once again. We got 6 targets last week for him. Not really any impressive fantasy scores yet on the entire season for Myers here, frankly, but a good matchup here against Arizona that had a real shootout last week, I would say, in their matchup with San Francisco. And hopefully we see Jacksonville find that efficiency here if you're going to be playing Myers. We have the aforementioned Raiders with Genty here. They're going to be popular on defense on FanDuel. And like I said, that final spot, Emmanuel Wilson, Kyle Pitts, still too cheap here with his role in Atlanta's offense. Now no Drake London this week. That's your FanDuel low-risk lineup. DraftKings, I think we're going to land in a little bit of a different spot here. We're still going to be interested in Jacoby Myers because he's far too cheap at 4,700 as one of the starters in this matchup with the Arizona Cardinals here. And then Michael Wilson, who was extremely popular last week, went out, earned basically every target for a wide receiver in this offense. 18 targets, put up 15 receptions, 185 yards. What else do we think is going to happen here in week number 12 with Jacoby Brissett under center? It's probably going to be the Wilson, McBride, and to some degree Greg Dortch show here when he throws the football. So I think we just go back to the well because Wilson's price hasn't come up enough to push us off of him. If he's going to be under $5,000 here on DraftKings and see 6+ targets, which seems fairly conservative after last week's passing volume, then he needs to be in our low-risk lineup here. So we have just $3,900 per player remaining to get to a tight end and a defense. And when we look at what's going to be popular this week on defense, it's going to be the Saints that are going to be the most popular play on DraftKings this week because the Falcons have no Michael Penix. They have no Drake London. And if you look at some of the splits for Kirk Cousins, who I liked the last time he had to make a start for Atlanta earlier this year, still on this channel, you can go and watch me make a fool of myself advocating for that. Kirk Cousins just hasn't really been that good since he's been on the Falcons. So the field is expecting the Saints to have a decent opportunity to perform here. And so we throw them in here at 2,500. We have 5,300 remaining to get a tight end into our lineups here. And basically we land on one of Jake Ferguson or Travis Kelce on this particular build. And I do think Travis Kelce is the better of the two here because we should expect the Colts to be playing in a pace-up situation here against the best team in the AFC thus far on the season. And the matchup is really, really good for Travis Kelce. The Colts are the 5th worst defense in the league defending tight ends in the NFL this season. So we're hoping to see a big performance for Kelce here, who had 13 targets last week against the Denver Broncos in a losing effort. So we'll see if he can put up a follow-up performance here at home in a must-win spot for the Chiefs here. And I think we're onto something here with a really good low-risk lineup with some cheap running backs that should all be in good situations to succeed here. Only one that's in a slightly negative game script is going to be Chase Brown. Facing, I guess the only player I haven't talked about for the low-risk build on both sides here, guys, is Drake May. I do think he's going to be the most popular quarterback this week against the Bengals. They're the worst pass defense in the NFL. May is a bona fide MVP candidate here, having a really, really strong season in his sophomore campaign, and he's going to be your chalk low-risk quarterback this week. Also going to be a great quarterback for high-risk lineups as well. So I think that's kind of the keys to the safe in low risk this week, and that's what I am trying to do here. But remember, we got to keep an eye on this situation with the Packers because it's not a guarantee that this is what's going to happen here. So keep an eye on this and keep an eye on our projected ownership on OccupyFantasy.com in the model because that'll give you the best information on where to pivot with the running back position here if we don't have access to Emmanuel Wilson. Now let's talk about high risk lineups. My favorite stacks this week. I'm focused on these high total games for sure. We're going to stick with the Lions, right? Because with all of the opportunity that Amon-Ra St. Brown should soak up, with all of the opportunity that Jameson Williams should soak up without Sam Laporta available, I think this is a really good 1-2 here and the highest upside stack on the board with Jared Goff against this Giants defense. That this is my favorite stack of the week. Now, this is one of those weeks where we have these double-digit spread games. Detroit favored by 13.5, Baltimore favored by 13.5, Seattle favored by 12.5. Historically, we have seen that teams that are in this type of situation, typically you don't need to use bringbacks in your stacks with these heavy favorites because those underdogs, those players on the underdog sides, more often than not, they don't score enough points to outscore their similarly priced peers in more competitive games. So, said differently, Wan'Dale Robinson, even though he's going to be one of the more popular plays this week over on FanDuel, if the Giants actually meet expectation and score, 17 points or less, and he doesn't necessarily have the greatest day with Jameis Winston under center, we go to similarly priced wide receivers around Wan'Dale Robinson, and maybe a player like Devontae Smith actually outscores him in fantasy football this week, or Jordan Addison against the Green Bay Packers. So that's kind of the way to think about your bringbacks in these game environments. Historically, the results have supported this kind of theory as well, that playing these guys priced around the huge underdogs tends to work out more often than not. Doesn't mean it's a guarantee, and obviously sometimes we can deviate from those rules when we have popular plays like Wan'Dale on FanDuel this week, but that is just ultimately what it comes down to with these mega underdogs here. It's not necessarily the best idea to use them as bringbacks in these situations. With Detroit being my favorite stack on the board with the highest implied team total in a great game environment, I think we still look to build with some of the chalky plays around them, right? We have Chase Brown. We can get that cheap running back in Emmanuel Wilson. We can get Michael Wilson in here. I'm just strictly looking at the popular plays right now. We get the Saints defense, and we have more than enough money to finish off a really, really high upside, high risk lineup here. I'm going to go with Travis Kelce, 6,500 for a flex. A lot of directions you can go here. I feel great about pretty much all of them, frankly. So pretty easy slate for me if I'm going to be playing single entry lineups. I think Detroit stacks are where I would like to go primarily, but behind them, I do think there's some upside with Dallas this week against Philadelphia. And I think my favorite way to do that is going to be Dak Prescott. It's going to be CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. And then we have that great Devontae Smith bringback, in my opinion, because he has been the guy at receiver for Jalen Hurts this year. This is another stack that I really like. Going to be a little bit harder to get to with the prices of these receivers. I don't have a ton of value in here, so this is probably more of a 4 wide receiver build. We would get that Michael Wilson value in here, for example, and we would probably have to flex CD. We probably have to go on the cheaper side for a tight end here. Player that's going to be popular is going to be Harold Fannin Jr. with Cleveland. But if we look at the Occupy model for a cheap tight end play, we got Mark Andrews near the top of the model, just 3,800 on DraftKings. We also have Dallas Goedert if you want to go with a 3-2 in that game, but I'm going to go with Andrews. Saints defense, 60-50 per player remaining. I think if we have access to Emmanuel Wilson, we have more than enough money here to get to Chase Brown, maybe upgrade defense, come off some chalk there, play somebody else. There's just a lot of directions you can go there, but I like the upside with Pickens, with CeeDee Lamb in this matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. And the Eagles side, frankly, also really, really strong with how poor Dallas's pass defense has been on the year, although obviously they looked a little bit better last week against the Raiders. And then finally, if he is back, then I think there's going to be a little bit of interest in this, right, guys? We got to make sure we get actual confirmation that Burrow is going to be playing before we can all out endorse this. But without access to Jamar Chase, who has been suspended, we have T. Higgins, number one receiver. We already have Chase Brown being the most popular running back on this slate. Stephon Diggs, the clear number one receiver for Drake May. And this is also a stack that I think has a tremendous amount of upside this week. I mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown is one of our underperforming wide receivers this week. We have quite a few of them that are available. If you want to see the full list of underperforming wide receivers, you're going to want to make sure you check out the Daily Plug, which is linked in the description of the video below here. All of these guys tend to be the ones that we want to use in high-risk lineups to differentiate. They have far more likelihood to regress in a way we can benefit from in fantasy football and give us a big number. So these are really, really, really good plays to consider using in really all of your lineups, but especially high-risk lineups differentiate. And we make sure we highlight them in our wide receiver section each and every single week. I went over 3 of my favorite stacks really quickly in this video, but I actually have 6 that I publish in the Daily Plug week in and week out. So you want to make sure you check those out as well. I give you my favorite pairings with quarterbacks and bringbacks as well for all of those 6 stacks that you can use in your 150 mass multi-entry lineup portfolios, if that is how you choose to play DFS. So certainly want to make sure you check those out as well. Good luck in week 12, guys. I am looking forward to this weekend immensely, and we'll be back to talk to you about week 13